Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. We're excited here to be with you. I'm Brandon Vaught, the content director at Word on Fire, and with me is the illustrious Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop Barron, great to have you.
Thank you, Brandon. Always great to be on with you.
So we're here on the cusp of Bishop Barron's visit to the Philippines. By the time this comes out, he'll actually be in the Philippines, but we're recording it a couple days early. And he's going there for the International Eucharistic Congress, which is being held in Cebu City in the Philippines. He'll be giving 3 talks in and around the Philippines. One of them is on the Eucharist. One of them is on the 3 paths to holiness, which we talked in depth about in the last episode. But the third talk is on the new evangelization, and in particular, the 7 qualities of a new evangelist. So we're going to go into each of those 7 qualities here. So let's start with the first one. The first one is that somebody who carries out the new evangelization needs to be in love with Jesus Christ.
Yeah, well, it's so important to note that evangelization is much more than the sharing of information, though you never accuse me of being, down on the church's intellectual life. But it means to share a friendship. To share a friendship with the Son of God. If you don't have that friendship, you can't share it. So you might have all kinds of information. You might be theologically astute. But what you're trying to share finally is not information, but a relationship. Here's someone I'd like you to meet. Here's someone that I know. In fact, this friendship is the most important of my life. And I want you to share in it too. So I'd like you to meet the Lord Jesus. Nemo dat quod non habet is the adage that means no one gives what he doesn't have. If you yourself don't have a friendship with the Lord, you can't possibly share it with anybody else. And so theology contributes to that, liturgy, prayer, et cetera, but it all contributes to, ultimately, a friendship. To evangelize is to share that friendship, using all the means, yes, indeed. But finally, it comes down to a relationship. You don't have it, you can't give it. That's why it's the most important quality, I think.
So this may be a basic but very fundamental question. How does one cultivate a friendship with Jesus Christ?
It happens through the church, I would say. Now, the Lord can reach out and establish friendship any way he wants, but I think from a Catholic perspective, the normal means is the church. It happens through the liturgy, through the Mass, through the sacraments. It happens through prayer. It happens through the witness of other Christians. It happens through moral instruction. It happens through correction. All the ways that you develop a friendship with your parents, with family members, with kids at school. Think of it along those lines. How do you come to know somebody? Well, in the church, you come to know Jesus through all of these means given to us by the church. See, we would say, since the church is the mystical body of Jesus, just as right now, you don't know me apart from my body. You know me because of my presence, the sound of my voice, which conveys my deepest convictions and so on. So we don't know Christ apart from his church. And so all these different means provided by the mystical body, that's how we come to know Jesus.
So that's the first quality of a new evangelist. The first key to sharing Christ effectively is to know him, to be a friend of Jesus. The second quality that you highlight is that the new evangelist must be a person of ardor. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, Aristotle, long ago, the Greek philosopher, said that people only finally listen to an excited speaker. It's one of those really important lines for anybody involved in communication. What makes us sit up and listen? Well, the person is excited about what he's sharing. Now, it doesn't mean he's histrionic and necessarily waving his arms around and all that, but you can sense not only does this person believe what he's saying, he's excited about it. He wants me to know it because he thinks I'll benefit from it as well. I always go back to, the advertising culture, and someone's advertising something as stupid as a, new exercise machine. And he's so filled with enthusiasm that, I'll get that machine too. Well, isn't it weird in some ways that we can get more excited about a stupid exercise machine than we can about the Lord Jesus Christ and eternal life? So I would say, if you're putting yourself to sleep in the pulpit, I'd say to a priest, you're not evangelizing very well. If you speak of Christ but in a kind of desultory way, sounds like you can barely stir up any energy, that's not going to excite anybody else. Ardor, fire, energy, enthusiasm. Let people see that. If they don't see it, you probably won't evangelize effectively.
Now, how about the fine line between like being filled with ardor and being overzealous? I know a lot of Catholics are worried about that. I don't want to, offend somebody. I don't want to come on too hard. Where do you draw that line?
Well, there is a line. You're right, and it's a matter of prudential judgment. But I would say, based on my own life experience, I think we so overdid the, I'll let you decide, and who am I to tell you what to do, and I'm not going to wear my faith on my sleeve, and all that. We so overdid it that I think a little enthusiasm, even a bit over the top, is not a bad thing. I like Catholics to show their fervor and ardor a bit more clearly and publicly, not to be ashamed of it. I think that we can learn a lot from the evangelical Protestants who aren't afraid to show their enthusiasm for the Lord. So yeah, there's a line, and you can overdo it. But I would say, if anything, knock yourself out, because I think we spend so many years underplaying it and trying to be so indirect and so, let the other be. So I'd say, let the fire show.
So the first quality of a new evangelist is they have to be in love with Jesus Christ. The second one here is that they need to be a person of ardor. The third quality is that they have to know the great story, or if, as you have said it before, to know the story of Israel. Tell us about that story.
Oh, it's so important. See, the trouble is, evangelization means announcing Jesus as the climax to the great story. If you don't know the story, he will devolve in very short order into, a religious teacher, a wise, moral exemplar. And that's fine as far as it goes. There's some truth to it, but you won't get the passion. See, the passion comes from, the energy here, the ardor comes from knowing this great story of Israel has come to its climax. Now, what story of Israel? We'll walk through the Bible. Creation. God made a good and beautiful world. The fall, sin. Sin has compromised our humanity. It's in many ways compromised the world. And just watch the 11 o'clock news, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Sin compromises the beauty and integrity of what God has created. Knowing those two things, indispensable. You get one or the other wrong, the whole story goes off the rails. But then what's God's response? His response is the formation of a people, Israel. A people formed after his own mind and heart, who think as he thinks, will as he wills, who know how to worship him, to be properly aligned to him. What was the point of Israel? The point was to form a people that's so compelling in its thinking, its willing, its worship, that they would draw the rest of the world. Israel would thereby become the magnet by which the whole world is drawn back to God. Now, read the story of Israel in the Bible. What do you hear? You hear all of that. You hear the purpose, the reason for Israel. But you also see that Israel falls short time and again. So the prophets have to call Israel back. They're given the law, but they don't follow the law. They're taught how to worship God, but they worship false gods, etc. Israel falls short again and again. And so its great prophets and seers and patriarchs began to dream of a Mashiach, an anointed figure, a Messiah, a new David, who would be Israel at its best, who would be faithful Yahweh meeting faithful Israel. The climax of the story is, and you hear it now in every page of the New Testament, the climax is, he came, it happened. It happened. The longed-for Messiah has come. He's taught Israel because he's aligned to Yahweh. He's worshipped aright. He cleanses the temple. He deals with the enemies of Israel. How? By his suffering on the cross. Faithful Yahweh and faithful Israel have in fact met. And now in the resurrection of this Messiah, of Jesus from the dead, we see the great victory. We see the reconciliation of divinity and humanity. In the resurrection, they saw the story has reached its climax. And now watch someone like Paul, a faithful Israelite, who knew the story, knew the expectation, and when he met the risen Jesus, realized it's happened. And I want all the world to know about it. Hence Paul going around the world saying, Jesus Kyrios, Jesus is the Lord. He's the King. See, that's evangelization. Not just that, oh, this guy had a lot of good religious ideas or he's taught us how to be good people. I mean, true enough, but sort of banal enough. Evangelization is the good news, the announcing of the good news that the story of Israel has come to its climax. And now we're all part of it. We're all drawn into it. Come become a member of his community, of his mystical body, the church. That's why knowing the story is so essential, so indispensable. It's like, if someone just read to you the last chapter of The Lord of the Rings, and you know nothing about the story. You'd never read it, never heard of it, and you read the last chapter, and you go, yeah, I guess. I don't know what any of that means, though. Tell the whole story, and then you see, oh, Frodo managed to get to the mountain, in the heart of the wicked land, Mordor, and he managed to get that ring thrown back into the place where it was crafted. Well, if you don't know the story, it's like, well, what does all that mean? But you know the story, you go, it's all been resolved. It's all been brought to its fulfillment. That's why knowing the Bible, knowing Israel, is indispensable for evangelization.
Now, I suppose just reading the scriptures themselves is probably, you would recommend, the best way to familiarize yourself with the story of Israel. But what other ways would you recommend people pursue?
Well, there are a lot of good things out now that kind of give you the timeline, they give you the overview of the biblical narrative. It's one thing to say now, sit down and read from Genesis through Revelation, but there are a lot of good things. Scott Hahn's done some things, and Jeff Cavins, and read someone like N.T. Wright, read Matthew Levering. A number of folks have put together that story in its sort of basic form. I think that's a really good way. Then, ultimately, yes, get into it. But also, once you get the basic outline, the Mass will begin opening up to you. Because, we read the readings at Mass, and I think 90% of the time, most Catholics are like, what? Isaiah? And what does this prophet have to do with this? And why are we linking the first reading and the gospel? So I would say start with one of these overviews and then really pay attention at Mass. Ultimately, be drawn into all the detail and dynamic of the biblical story.
So that was the fourth key to becoming a new evangelist. The third key, the knowledge of the story of Israel. The fourth key is to understand the culture. Now, isn't it enough just to know the Bible or know church teachings? Why do we got to have our finger on the pulse of the culture too?
Yeah, let's go back to Karl Barth's great image of the preacher should have the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. Because, see, the idea is to draw the world into the story of Israel. So you have to know the story of Israel. But then, what's happening now? What's happening today? What's blocking people from getting into that story? What are opportunities? What's sort of resonant with the Bible in the culture today? If you don't do that, you've given the answer, but you've not stirred up the question. There are a lot of questions that are implicit in the culture today. What are they? What are the longings of the human heart? What are the unresolved tensions today? And then if I can correlate those questions to the answers of the Bible, now I've really begun to preach or to evangelize. That's why I do a lot of work with films and with books and with trends going on in the popular culture, the high culture, because that's indispensable to the work of correlating question and answer.
I think a lot of people look out at the culture, specifically the world of movies, and think it's all bad. We need to reject it. That's all counter Christian. But like you said, you've spent a lot of time looking for the so-called seeds of the word in these films, and you've said that secularism, as bad of an ideology it is, can be an opportunity because it's produced a lot of people who are thirsty for the gospel. It's sort of prepared them for the solution of Christianity. Talk a little bit about one of the passages that in the scriptures that lays this out beautifully is St. Paul's visit to the Areopagus, where that's sort of where the faith and the culture first come to heads. So talk about that.
Yeah. One of the great passages in the Acts of the Apostles, Paul makes his way to the cultural capital of the time, to Athens. The Areopagus is this kind of rocky outcropping right below the Acropolis, right below the great temple of the Parthenon. So he's at the cultural, religious, intellectual center of the high culture of the time. And Paul goes there. He goes to synagogues usually first because he figures Jews have a better chance of understanding the great story. He said, I got the climax of the story. You folks know it, so I'll start there. But he wasn't afraid to go outside the Jewish world. And what he did when he got to the Areopagus is he appealed to the implicit religiosity of the culture. I've been walking around your city and seeing all your temples and shrines, and I realize what a religious people you are. So he compliments them, but not just in a sort of idle way or a flattery way. He's noticing something in the culture, an aspiration toward God. And Paul basically says to them, I got what you're looking for. I know the story of the true God. And you're all interested in him. You're implicitly searching for him. In fact, I noticed an altar, he says, to an unknown God. Well, the one that you don't really know clearly, I do know clearly. And let me tell you his story. So it's not a confrontational approach. It's not I'm right, you're wrong, or you're all mixed up. There's a lot in your culture that is implicitly Christian. And I want to bring that to explicit expression. So I think that's still a good strategy for evangelists today, is to look around. What's in your movies and books and songs that is redolent of the gospel, that represents a longing? Well, let me tell you about that. And you might not be real clear on what you're doing, but let me clarify it for you. That's still, I think, a very good strategy and will be less likely to raise the hackles, to get people defensive. So I've tried to use it. I'll say a quick word about those who feel a lot of films are just, morally objectionable, et cetera. Well, I know a book that includes, murder and rape and incest and masturbation and cruelty and murder, and it's called the Bible. If you read the Bible, all those things are in it. If you made a movie of the biblical stories, it'd be at least an R rating. My point there is we can't afford to be that fussy and puritanical that, I can't watch a movie because there's something immoral going on. Well, very often what the filmmaker is saying is, look what happens to these people when they engage in immoral activity. Look how sad and lost they become. They're very rarely, in my experience, saying, hey, we should all live this way. Look at this. No, most of them, in my experience, are saying, look at this, watch this. Here's how not to live. So what looks like an immoral movie often has a deeply moral purpose. But even let's say it's a movie that doesn't have a lot of serious moral purpose, we might be able to find something in it that's still worth using. And I'd say this to evangelists, not everything works for everybody. If you're trying to evangelize someone who is very maybe puritanical, very squeamish about sex and violence, well, I would say maybe you wouldn't want to use that method. Use another method with them. So you got to be rangy, too, about the culture. You got to be able to respond to different needs and different personalities. So that's why the culture, though, has got to be central in this endeavor.
So to recap so far, we're looking at Bishop Barron's 7 qualities of a new evangelist. So what does it take to share the gospel in today's world? And we've looked at 4 of the keys so far. The first quality is you're in love with Jesus Christ. The second quality is that you have ardor. You're a person of passion and enthusiasm. The third quality is that you know the great story, the story of Israel. And then the fourth quality, which we just talked about, was you have to understand the culture. The fifth quality is that you need to have the heart of a missionary. What does that mean?
It means that the faith grows when you give it away. It means the purpose of being a Christian is not simply to rest comfortably in your Christianity and say, well, I've found the answer. I understand that Jesus is the climax of the great story. I've given my life to him, and that's great. No, I mean, every Christian, by virtue of baptism, is a missionary. You've now been sent forth as priest, prophet, and king. You've been sent forth to share the faith. I've often observed that there's no exception to the rule that in the Bible, no one is ever given an experience of God without being sent on mission. Find an example of that where someone encounters God, God addresses someone's life, and God doesn't send that person on mission. No exception. Biblical religion is not like a contemplative program whereby you've come to know the truth and the good and the beautiful, and now you simply rest in it. That might be people like Plotinus, might be the Gnostics. It's not biblical religion. Anyone that's given a sense of God is sent out on mission. And so who evangelizes? Well, everyone does. Everyone's supposed to. That's what I mean by having a heart of someone who's been sent. Mary proceeds in haste into the hill country once she's received the message from the angel. Simon Peter says, Lord, leave me, I'm a sinful man. And the Lord forgives him and then says, now, from now on, you'll be a fisher of men. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And when Paul is baptized, he's sent. He knows he's a chosen vessel. Time and time again, Old Testament and New, the chosen ones are missionaries. They're sent. Same is true today. No one gets an experience of God without being given a mission. I love how Hans Urs von Balthasar says that in the Bible, we don't really know who we are till we find our mission. We can be identified by our family and by our society. We can give it a name and so on. But you don't really know who you are until you got your mission, which is why often people get new names in the Bible when they understand their mission, when they embrace it. So Saul becomes Paul, Simon becomes Peter, Jacob becomes Israel, etc. That's good. Abram becomes Abraham. Once you know your mission, you know what your real name is.
Many of our Protestant brothers and sisters have a great missionary zeal, and I think part of it's driven by their concern for their eternal fate of their friends and family. You know, they say, if I don't tell this person about Jesus, then after they die, they might end up in hell or something. You've emphasized that a zeal for missions, for sharing the gospel, is driven not only by the eternal destinies of people, but by their lives right now, you know, by the dismal fate of being separated from God right now. Mm-hmm. Tell us why, you know, there's an urgency for this, for having this heart of a missionary.
Yeah, well, you really said it there. You know, hell, as you suggest, separation from God, not being rooted, grounded in God. I mean, hell begins here. I mean, we've all been there in some way. When I drift into what Augustine called the land of unlikeness, you know, where I'm not like unto God, but I've wandered into alienation from God. That hurts. That's dreadful. It has terrible consequences for your life and the life of those around you. I want people out of that, even now. I mean, I'm eager to share what I found even now. The ultimate trajectory of that is what the church calls hell. I mean, into eternal separation from God. So, of course, I want to get people out of that state, and I'm eager to share the message to accomplish that end. But as you rightly suggest, I want to get people out of this state of being right now because it leads to such unhappiness. Look around the secular world. That's what you see, I think, is a lot of deep unhappiness, a flattening out of life. I want people out of that now. And so I've got a missionary enthusiasm to do that even now.
Now, the sixth quality of a new evangelist is having a knowledge and a love for the traditions of the church. Now, we don't necessarily mean, you know, the traditional devotional practices. Those are good. You're talking here about all of the artistic and literary and architectural gems found throughout our tradition. Why is it important? Why can't we just say have the Bible and our personal relationship with God? Why do we need the tradition of the church?
Yeah, because why limit ourselves? You know, of course, the Bible stands at the heart of it. So all the traditions you reference, from architecture to art to lives of the saints to liturgy and so on, they go back ultimately to the Bible. That's true. The Bible is the soul of theology we hear at Vatican II. But heck, why limit it? If you've got Chartres Cathedral and you've got Dante's Divine Comedy, you've got Chesterton's essays, you've got C.S. Lewis, you've got Thomas Aquinas, you have Michelangelo. I mean, why would you leave that behind? In fact, wouldn't you fall in love with it? Because you realize all of it has come from Jesus Christ. It's flowed from him. And so you love what he's inspired. You love what speaks of him. You love, if you love a person, you love pictures of that person. You know, you love photographs. You love stories about that person. Same thing here. You know, at the heart of the Divine Comedy is Jesus, that Dante was grasped by him, saved by him. And he tells this great story about it. The Sistine ceiling is all about the Bible and Michelangelo's encounter, his living encounter with Jesus. Why would you leave it behind? You know, There might be elements of the tradition that have wandered too far away, or they've become corrupt, and I'm sure that happens. But the corruption of some should not lead you to reject the whole tradition. I love it. It's good, it's true, and it's beautiful. It's very effective for the evangelical enterprise. And so it'd just be silly, in my mind, not to use it. And then watch how the great evangelists have used it, have used sermons, and they've used the lives of the saints, and they've used works of art to announce Jesus. So to me, that's kind of a no-brainer. I understand throughout the tradition there have been corruptions, and that can lead people to say, get rid of all of it and go back to the beginning. Well, see, I'm with Newman that I think the beginnings of things are often the least interesting, like a seed vis-a-vis a tree. The tree that's come from that seed is so much more compelling. Or Newman's example of the river. There's the beginning, there's the source of the river, but I can leap over the source of the Mississippi. But then there's the mouth of the Mississippi. When the thing has gone through thousands of miles, taken on tributaries and so on. It's been deepened and broadened. So you get to New Orleans, I would say the Mississippi is far more compelling and beautiful and wonderful and dangerous and strange and all those great things. So with the Catholic tradition, it's the broadening and deepening of the river that began with Jesus and his disciples. Or it's like the tree now that's grown from that acorn, that seed. That's the tradition, and I think why we should use it.
Now, the seventh and final quality of a new evangelist is that you need to be adept at using the new media. Why is that important?
Well, as I've said before, this is a revolution comparable only to the Gutenberg revolution in terms of communication. Paul used the cutting-edge communication of his time, which was letters on parchment that were communicated through the Roman roads. We think of how primitive, but that was cutting-edge technology, if you want, at the time. If Paul were here, would he use Facebook, and would he use YouTube, and would he use podcasting? I mean, to me, the question answers itself. He wanted the whole world to know that Jesus Christ is Lord. Well, heck, he got on boats and he walked the Roman roads, and he wanted to go to Spain, which meant the end of the world to him. He spoke, he wrote, he used whatever he had in front of him. So to my mind, of course he'd use it. So I think new evangelists today, as John Paul said, new in ardor, new in expression, but also new in method. Well, what are the new methods we have? Gosh, even Fulton Sheen, would have died to have these methods that we have. Put something on YouTube and it's 24/7 like that. Do a podcast like this, it can be heard, all over the world. To my mind, it would be just completely counterintuitive not to use. Because Jesus said, go and announce to all the nations. Well, what's the best way to do that? But using these new extraordinary media that also give, individuals a chance. I don't have to go to NBC or go to the local radio station. I can do something right now. So, God knows they can be abused like anything can. Can the gospel be presented in too superficial a manner and all that? Sure, of course. But I think, again, to reject something wholesale because of the possibility of corruption, that's just not kosher. So learn them, use them. And I speak now as kind of this old man, but young people today who grew up with all this technology, they have it in their fingers, they have it in their bones and blood. Of course, use it. Let it be undergirded by a strong intellectual grasp of the tradition. Yes, indeed. Books ought to undergird the whole thing. But not to use it, I think would be completely counterintuitive.
So those are the 7 qualities of a new evangelist. Let's recap them real quick. The first one is that you have to love Jesus Christ. You have to be in friendship with him. The second one is that you have to be a person of ardor. You have to have passion and enthusiasm. The third is to know the great story of Israel and know how Christ fits into it. The fourth is to understand the culture around you. The fifth is to have a heart of a missionary, to have zeal for drawing people into a relationship with God. The sixth is to know the traditions of the church, all of the artistic and literary and architectural beauty of our tradition. And then the final one is to use the new media. So these are the 7 qualities of a new evangelist. Time now for our regular question from our callers. You can ask a question of Bishop Barron anytime by visiting askbishopbarron.com. If you go there, you can record a question on your phone or your computer or tablet, and each week we choose one question to play here on the air. Today's question comes from Gregory, who asked a question very much related to these 7 qualities of a new evangelist. So here's Gregory.
Bishop Barron, my name is Greg, and I'm an undergraduate at a small Catholic college in Kentucky. I have heard you speak at length on the importance of a new generation of apologetics, and was wondering what you think are the most important characteristics an apologist must have, both in terms of education and personality. Is this something that young people like myself can attempt, or should it be left to experts?
Yeah, thanks for the good question. In some ways, this whole podcast, I just answered the question as best as I can do it. I have these 7 qualities, but let me maybe specify it a bit. I would say someone that wants to be an apologist today has got to be smart, and has to read, and then read more to know the great tradition. It does not do the church any good for someone to get into this thing in a very superficial way. We got smart people coming after us now who are doubting the existence of God, denying all the central aspects of the faith. So I think we got to meet them with our best and sharpest weapons. We've got to know our own tradition intellectually. It's a peeve of mine, of course, that most of my lifetime, the time after the council, we have dropped the ball on this. And I think we've so underplayed our intellectual tradition, and it's left us vulnerable to our enemies. You know what I'm saying? When I was coming of age, we so underplayed apologetics. We were down on apologetics. It was defensive, it was rationalistic, etc. But the result was, when the new atheists rose up and now their army of followers, we left the swords in the dust somewhere. We have nothing to defend ourselves, Oh, won't they believe us if we're just nice to them? Well, the short answer is no, they won't. So smart. Read all the time. I tell my students when I was rector of the seminary, they all want to get involved in the new media. I said, stick with the old media for a long time. Stick with books. Read Augustine. Don't do an MTV thing where I can't read more than 2 paragraphs. Read the thousands of pages of our great tradition. If you're serious about it, not everyone has to be an apologist. Don't get me wrong. I mean, not every Christian is called to be a cutting-edge apologist. But if you want to do that, then I need you to read a lot and deal with the enemies of the faith. I mean, go through Thomas Aquinas. Read the objections to Thomas's questions. You'll hear most of what you hear from the atheists, old and new. Anyway, so there's my first thing. But second one, and it's not meant to dilute the first one at all, you have to have an attitude of love. If you go into an apologetics and you're full of hatred and intellectual violence and you're angry, that's not going to work. That will not. You might have good arguments and you might even kind of convince somebody, but as Newman said, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So I would say couple the intelligence with deep kindness and with a deep interest in the person you're talking to. So it's very easy for apologists, and I myself can be guilty of this. Hey, I won the argument, or I got a cleverer approach. But your goal is not to win arguments. Your goal is to win souls, is to win people. And if you so turn someone off in the course of your argumentation, well, then you've been a lousy apologist. So it's a deep intelligence coupled with a deep kindness, an interest in the other. That makes a good apologist.
Well, thanks again for listening to the Word on Fire show. You'll find a new episode every single week, and you'll also find a bunch of links and videos pertaining to this episode by visiting wordonfireshow.com. I wanted to mention one special resource that ties in well with the topics we've been discussing here. Bishop Barron has a great 90-minute documentary and study program all on the new evangelization. You can find it at catholicismnewevangelization.com, and it's great to go through either by yourself or through a group. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Word on Fire show.